All right, I'd like to call the meeting to order of the Townsend Affordable Housing Trust, Monday, January 9th at 1 p.m. Could I have a roll call, please?
Beverly Napier, present.
Cindy Boundy, present.
And Veronica Kell, present. And I just want to announce that we do have 2 open positions on the Housing Trust. So, and I believe they're posted.
I think so.
All right, so, any additions or deletions? I don't know. And I'm not the chair, we just are, we're chairless. So,
At least we have a place to sit though.
but that is good.
That's true.
So, we have town council Adam Coffey with us. And, we asked him to attend to discuss the role of what our role is, the Affordable Housing Trust. And how that intersects, if in fact it does, with the housing authority. So,
So
you want to come on up here and join us, or if you're more comfortable over there, whatever.
So nice to see you all. I think I've met all of you at some point or another, or seen you. Nice to be here. So I've made copies, and of course I need one for myself, and I've got 4 additional. So somebody's going to be out.
I don't need to have one.
What's the date on that one?
So this is the 2018 version, which I believe
Is
is
that
the
this?
yes is the latest version. There is
Okay, so
an
there's-
earlier version of the same
Cheryl
document.
did all her stuff. She dropped them off at my house yesterday, and this was in it, so, yeah, so if someone else needs this.
It should say version 3 at the bottom. That's what yours says as well. V3.
Updated guidebook V.3.
Correct.
Okay, so here, is this one-sided? Yeah.
It is, so you already have it?
So I have it, so if you want to give that to Eric,
Great.
feel free.
Trying to kill as few trees as possible before I left the office. So it's a lengthy guidebook, but I printed it because I think that this is a well-written guide. It was prepared by Jennifer Goldson, who's a planning consultant. I think she's based out of Concord. I've worked with her a couple of times over the years. And it's a sort of plain English guidebook to municipal affordable housing trusts. And, some of it is, it's comprehensive. So some of it is not necessary for you to review because it addresses matters like what is an affordable housing trust? I presume you already know that. How do you form an affordable housing trust? We've done that. Talks about the form of the declaration of trust and things of that sort. So those sort of technical components of affordable housing trusts are probably not necessary for you to review, but
Can I just say one thing?
Sure.
Jennifer Goldson, who wrote this,
Mhm.
was the consultant for our town's housing production fund.
okay.
It's right here, J.M. Goldson.
That's great.
See, I thought I had heard that name before.
And when was your housing production fund certified?
Last January, so about a year ago.
Okay.
We had a meeting in January. 12/9 of last year, 2021 was the last review that we did of it. They updated it, so I have an old copy here. And it was in the January, February timeframe where it was
Certified.
certified.
Okay.
Yeah,
And the certification is good for 5 years, so that should bring you into 2027.
So 2027,
Okay.
okay. Anyway, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's fine. So we can talk a bit about housing production plans because they're referenced here. So on the second page of the document that I printed out, you'll see the chapters, and this is what I mean when I say that some of it is a bit repetitive and may tell you things you already know, but it's 6 chapters in total. Chapter 1 tells you what a municipal affordable housing trust is. Chapter 2 is helpful, talks about ways in which the affordable housing trust can help the community. Some informal, some more formal. 3 is more procedural, talks about how to establish a vision, but then the role of the members of the Board of Trustees. Chapter 4 is helpful, talks about different strategies for gaining support in the community and approval by members of the community. Chapter 5 talks about the actual substance of what it is that you can do. That's probably maybe the most helpful chapter in the guidebook. And then chapter 6 are just some examples of other affordable housing trusts and what they have been able to accomplish. So as I went through this last week, sort of in preparation for our meeting today. I'll bring to your sort of attention a few things that are helpful. So if you just sort of shuffle through to page 7, page numbers are on the bottom right corner. So there's some questions here at the bottom of the page about affordable housing trusts and what they can do. So it says, affordable housing trust can advance your local housing goals, talks about how it can work with other committees like Community Preservation Committee. And obviously one of the topics we had planned to discuss today was how it can work with a housing authority. And there are housing authorities in many communities that work in conjunction with affordable housing trust to achieve affordable housing goals. And then talks about the fact that there are some communities that may not need a local housing trust. There's an example on the next page in Andover, and I've got a few examples of my own that I can provide, but talks about how in Andover there was a project, I think it's described on page 9, Cheever Circle. Andover was able to partner with the Andover Community Trust, which is a 501c3 organization, and sign a purchase and sale agreement with a private owner and provide assistance so as to allow for the redevelopment of the property and its long-term designation as an affordable housing unit. I work with affordable housing trusts in a number of our communities. One of my probably most active affordable housing trusts is in the town of Ashland, Massachusetts. Ashland established its affordable housing trust probably at this point 12, 15 years ago. And so they were in existence, I guess it's 2023, so maybe a few years before that, but it was in existence during the recession in the 2009, 2010 timeframe. And so what was happening at that point in time, I'm sure you all are aware of the way in which affordable housing units are created and the way that affordability is maintained long-term. If you have, let's say, a Chapter 40B proposal that's developed and a quarter of the units in the development are affordable housing units, there's a deed restriction that goes on record. If they're for sale units, that's a rider that is attached to the deed to the unit or to the home. If they're rental units, then there's a regulatory agreement that establishes the affordability. And what the affordability restriction says, at least in most circumstances, are that the unit must be sold at a sales price or rented at a rental price that is affordable to low to moderate income individuals. And that's based upon the area median income and is generally considered to be individuals who earn 70 to 80% of the area median income on an annual basis.
Larger area or just the town?
It's a larger area. The state, it's actually HUD, so the federal government has divided the state into what they refer to as metropolitan statistical areas. And they're just groups of communities. But it's important because what it means is that, for example, your MSA includes Fitchburg, your MSA includes Leominster. And so you're going to be included in communities that are more urban communities that are going to affect that sort of socioeconomic balance that you might have in a smaller community like Townsend.
Right.
So this 70 to 80% standard, often means that these affordable units can be sold. It's different than, let's say, Section 8 housing, which is at a 30% standard. What we often see is that, school teachers, firefighters, police officers, that salary range, many of those individuals qualify for these types of units, depending upon their household size and where they are on the pay scale. But the way that the affordability is maintained with these units, as I said before, is that there's a deed rider recorded. Well, the deed rider states that if it's a for sale unit, let's say, and I'm an affordable purchaser and I buy the home and I live there for 5 years, and after 5 years, I decide I want to sell it. When I go to sell that unit, I have to sell it for an affordable purchase price. And there's a multiplier that's in the regulatory agreement that allows me to take advantage of the fact that the economy has changed over 5 years, but I'm not going to make a windfall on it because I still have to sell it at an affordable purchase price. Well, what happens if I can't find somebody that qualifies for that affordable purchase price? Well, there are provisions in the deed rider that might allow that affordable unit to fall off the inventory. The newer deed riders are more protected than the old deed riders. But again, community like Ashland, there were a number of 40B projects that were approved in Ashland in the early 1990s under the version 1 of the deed rider. And version 1 of the deed rider effectively eliminated the affordability restriction in the event of a foreclosure. It provided for notice to the town prior to sale. But if there could be no eligible purchaser located, then they could sell it at a market rate. And when they sell it at market rate, the difference between the supposed purchase price and the market rate price gets paid over to the town, and it can go into the affordable housing trust. But in Ashland, it said we don't want a check for $80,000. We can't create another affordable unit for $80,000. We'd prefer to preserve the affordability. And so back in the 2009, 2010 timeframe, Ashland had several $100,000 that they had accumulated in their affordable housing trust fund. And so what they began doing is they began purchasing units, and they could only manage a couple at a time because these units were in the $250,000 to $300,000 range. They could only purchase a couple at a time, but they would purchase these units. They would make some minor renovations to them because they were at that point, 20 years old. And then they would flip them to an eligible purchaser, but it would give them the ability to update the unit, making it more appealing. And number two, give them a longer period of time within which they can locate an eligible purchaser as opposed to that short 90-day window under the old deed rider. So they were very active doing that during the recession, and they've continued to be active over the years in preserving the affordability of units by buying them, rehabbing them, and flipping them.
Okay, so we have a 40B in town, it's Copper Smith Way.
Mhm.
And there is a certain percentage that were affordable units. And I'm assuming that there's a deed restriction. Who in town, I don't know that we've ever received any funds from the sale of those properties. And I know that they have gone off the affordability list when they've been sold because they didn't find a buyer. I know that that happened last spring. Who in town even knows about this happening and looks at that? Who looks at that?
So typically, under the regulatory agreements and deed riders, there were monitoring agents that were identified. The most common monitoring agent back in the 90s and early 2000s was CHAPA.
It is Chap.
Yeah, CHAPA hasn't been taking on new projects for many years now, so they don't serve as a monitoring agent any longer on any new projects. But CHAPA still exists as an organization, and CHAPA was likely the monitoring agent if this is a 40B from 30 years ago.
Is that an acronym?
Yes, Citizens Housing and the Planning Association.
So when I was working here, I would get notification from CHAPA that there was a unit for sale, and I was asked to, widely distribute it so a lot of people could see that it was for sale. When I was here, there was never a unit that wasn't sold as affordable. I don't
Oh,
know what's
really?
happened since I left, but I was tracking all of that stuff.
Okay, so if we didn't have a land use coordinator, which we did not for a long time, who would have received that notification?
The treasurer should have received any money if CHAPA would be the person that would.
It would be interesting to know
I mean, there should have been
what
plenty
has
of
happened.
opportunity for the town to avail itself of its rights, because it's not quite as simple as CHAPA facilitates or becomes aware of the sale of the unit and notifies the town and you get a check. It's a multi-step process. So typically when the affordable unit becomes available for sale and there is an effort, I think it's 90 days under the old restriction to sell it, and the monitoring agent can't locate, or the lottery agent can't locate an eligible purchaser, there's a notice that's required for the town, and that puts the town on the clock to exercise its right of first refusal under the deed rider to buy that unit. If the town chooses not to exercise its right of first refusal, that's when the right reverts back to the homeowner to then sell it at a market rate, at which point it would be sold at a market rate, and the differential between the market sales price and the affordable sales price, less any closing costs, would be credited to the town, and that's when you'd receive. But that notification goes to the chief executive official of the town, so it would have come to the selectmen, or should have come to the selectmen.
I know I saw a notice. Do you know anything about this, Jody? Maybe last spring.
For monitoring purposes, I haven't seen anything.
I think there's a little bit of homework to do there. Okay, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that there was a unit for sale. They didn't find somebody, and it was coming off the list. This was about a year ago, during a year.
Was that in the final phase?
I have no idea, because
Because Kevin and,
oh, the third phase, the one that they're working on now.
Lois
No,
Lane.
no,
Yeah.
no. It wasn't there. It was,
It was one of the originals
Was it on
on
Copper?
Coppersmith
it was
or,
one of those.
or Penny Lane, maybe.
Yeah, or one of those two.
Great road, James.
Yeah.
Lois Lane and Penny Lane.
Okay. Right. So we should really.
Right, so that's one way that Affordable Housing Trust can be active in the community, is just preserving the affordability of existing affordable units. And in a town like Townsend, that makes sense because you've got affordable units. I mean, I represent some communities that they simply don't have any affordable housing. They're at 0% on the SHI or barely above it. And so there's not a whole lot of preserving to do, but you can do that here. You can also facilitate the development of new projects. So I'll give you another example, happens to be from Ashland as well. This is back probably in, I'm going to say 2012, 2013 timeframe. The town, through its Affordable Housing Trust, there was a property that was conveyed to the town. The town then flipped it to the Affordable Housing Trust. The Affordable Housing Trust pre-permitted the site. So they got permission for a Chapter 40B development. They made application for a project eligibility letter from the Department of Housing and Community Development. They drew up concept plans for a proposed 100% affordable project. It was age restricted, 100% affordable. They got permission from the state in the form of a PEL. They then went to the Zoning Board of Appeals, which of course you can do, can apply to your own Zoning Board of Appeals. They got comprehensive permit, a 40B permit from the Zoning Board of Appeals. And then they went out to bid to find a developer. They had no intention of building it themselves. Their Affordable Housing Trust is not an experienced development entity, but they went out to bid. They ultimately partnered with two different organizations that entered into a joint bid. The Planning Office for Urban Development, which is the development arm of the Archdiocese, and EA Fish, which is a well-known developer, Metro Boston. Those two entities partnered, proposed 90 units of affordable housing, all 90, all age restricted, in two buildings. And ultimately they entered into a purchase and sale agreement, and then they didn't want to build exactly what the Affordable Housing Trust had got permitted. They wanted to build something slightly differently. So they went back to the ZBA and amended the comprehensive permit and eventually proceeded. Not a perfect fairy tale, because in the intervening 6 years between the trust acquiring it and pre-permitting it and signing the purchase and sale agreement with the development entity, adjacent property was developed with subdivision of single family homes. They all filed an appeal of the amended comprehensive permit. They filed 4 separate lawsuits against the town. We litigated for 7 years. And we ultimately prevailed in all 4 lawsuits. Went up to the appeals court twice. So it was a lot of litigation, but ultimately the project in part got built. They built one of the 2 units and one of the 2 buildings, and then decided not to proceed with the second. But we got, I think there were 50 or 52 units in the first building, 100% affordable. Those projects are difficult, the 100% affordable projects, because you're not going to find an average developer in your community that'll do them. You need to find a developer who's familiar with the low-income housing tax credit program, so that they can avail themselves of those state credits. But that's what they did. And that takes usually 2-3 rounds of applications before you receive funding, because there's such a backlog through the state program. So they applied, I think, for almost 3 straight years before they finally got the funds.
Did they originally apply under a LIP?
Yeah, so when it originally came forward, I mean, it was a LIP in both instances, but yes,
Okay.
when the Affordable Housing Trust permitted it, it did so as a LIP in the first instance.
LIP is a local initiative project where the town applies for a 40B. It's friendly. So they do all the work of getting the money and all of that. We did one in town with Habitat for Humanity, and we applied to the zoning board for that. It was just one single family home, but we did it under that program.
Right. And the process, the permitting process before the ZBA for a LIP, a friendly 40B, as opposed to an unfriendly or a traditional 40B, is the same. The only difference is that prior to making application to the state to get that eligibility determination, you get the support of the Board of Selectmen or the Select Board. And so you would seek that permission, which was, of course, easy to do if you're an affordable housing trust in most instances, because you're working cooperatively with your community. So in most cases, the trusts have a right. In most cases, the trust have the support of the select board.
Okay.
Those are a lot of work, though.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I kind of want to drop to 2.2 real quick. So that's something that we could do with this property. This is the plans for that South Row Road property.
Oh, you found them.
Well, Joan had them. We didn't have them. I thought I had them soft copy and I didn't. This is what I talked to you
Yes.
about. Where make part of it market rate and part of it affordable.
Right.
And I think we should consider doing a friendly 40B, now that you've talked about this, going back to Ross and having them redo this. This was done in 2007.
Yeah.
You know about this.
Yeah,
probably, Karen, 'cause
Yeah,
you
we
were
got
the
a
one doing
grant
it.
to evaluate this property, so we had Ross go out and do the wetlands and determine how much septic we could do, and it was I don't remember how many units it was, but the town said, you know, it's too much, the driveway's too long, we just don't have the money
It's,
to do that.
it's, 18 bedrooms is what it is.
Yeah.
It's 12 units, 12 two-bedroom units. 12, no, nine two-bedroom units. But I think they should look at it again. But this is what they came up with. And,
The economics are certainly different from 2007.
pardon me?
For sure.
The economics are certainly different from 2007.
Yeah, for sure, and. I'm
And the
wondering-
wetlands maybe as well.
Yeah, they might have to go up and delineate again, but I'm wondering if we were doing a 40B, if that makes a difference. Were you guys talking 40B when you did this, or just
Yeah.
straight development?
Yeah,
You were?
but with a 40B, you can't override conservation.
That's
You know,
true.
the wetlands is in any project,
It's
no matter
separate.
what.
Right, so,
What you can override are local, more stringent wetlands controls. So 40B is all encompassing, so it does include conservation, unlike, let's say, 40R, which doesn't. So under 40B, if there are more strict local requirements than the baseline protections under the state act, those can be overridden by the zoning board of appeals. It's actually a point of contention in many projects, and I've done a lot of 40B work over the year, more than probably any other area of the law. It's primarily, it's almost entirely what I did when I started practicing. And that's often a challenge for ZBAs, because ZBAs are not well versed in wetlands law. And they're being asked by developers to supersede, override, bypass more stringent local requirements like 35-foot no-touch buffers, for example.
and everything on this is, outside of the 100-foot. They didn't go inside the
Right.
100-foot.
Because I
They
asked
could
them
have.
not to.
Yeah.
And so that's the
I
point,
would
you would
say
have. the
do
ability
it,
to do that.
you know,
I mean-
ignore the 100.
I should, I also only
Keep,
brought four
keep the
properties,
50, but
but, these are all the properties with the development constraints.
Thank you.
So, the one we're talking about right now. Oh, sorry. The one we're talking about right now is on the page.
2551.
Yes, the third page.
So it's the third page. So in this plan, in this map, you can see the yellow is
Upland.
it's partial constraint. So it's within a buffer zone of something that needs to be permitted. The red is the absolute constraints, and the red over on the right is a stream that runs through the property. So you'd have to come in from the south row side where that tiny frontage is. And so this would have to be a 40B, because I don't believe there's enough frontage. I think it's only like 25 feet. And it's sloped down this way, so the water runs down the lot, down to this other stream down here.
And there'd be no ability to place a crossing at the end of Hickory Drive.
It would have to be a bridge that goes over the stream.
Yep.
And we own there's a little red triangle there. That's another lot that is owned. It's like 0.45.
But there's also a stream that has to be crossed to come in from South Row Road.
There is?
Yes, on these plans that Ross did. Isn't that a bridge right there?
Looks like it.
Yeah,
That's
there's
it.
an intermittent stream coming in
Oh.
from South Row Road. I was wondering about that. That was something I was gonna ask. you
Yeah,
about.
because it's not indicated. I mean, this is the state's GIS.
It's an intermittent stream according to this.
So then that would be,
Maybe the intermittent
This is
streams
an
go.
intermittent stream perennial on the one that comes off of Hickory.
right,
So, but either way, they have a bridge drawn here, if I'm reading that right. They're not, going through the stream. Um,
And the neighbor's shed is on the property too.
oh, well,
Yeah,
That's always fun.
yeah.
which neighbor?
The one on the north side.
So it's, Mosley's.
But anyways, that's the
Okay.
constraints on that lot.
Okay,
But I would have Ross redo the wetlands
yeah. Anyway,
and the septic.
so, but we could follow that process that you just, described.
Absolutely. I mean, the site in Ashland was certainly smaller than 19.3 acres, and they got 90 units approved. Now, I'm not saying you want 90 units on the site, and I'm not saying you want 100% affordability, because that really restricts your ability to find a potential developer. Ashland benefits from its location, which is, in closer proximity to urban areas and higher housing costs, and so they had some benefits there, but you would have the ability to develop the site under 40B, and you would have the ability to do so in a way where you could encroach, and it's not even encroaching, you could do work within the 100-foot jurisdictional bounds, and you could, if you so chose, encroach upon the 50, 35-foot buffer zones as well. But you've got plenty of area to probably do it without significant encroachments, other than the stream crossing.
I would not recommend encroaching
I wouldn't go beyond 50, but I might go
up to,
up to the 50.
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
'Cause that's
we
the no
did that a
bill.
lot.
Oh, yeah. Because you have to, there's not enough land in town that doesn't have
Right.
wetlands on it.
And so I would remove the 100-foot requirements on Ross and say there's a 50-foot requirement.
Turn all those 2 bedrooms into duplexes.
I think it was 3 buildings
It's 3 buildings.
with
it's right
3
here,
units in each
With
building.
3 2-bedroom units in each building. So
Flats or townhouses?
I'm
I
guessing
think side by
townhouses
side, yeah.
that,
But I mean, you could reconfigure that so that it's all one building or a continuous whole line of,
or
and
it
not
could be
just,
separate. It could be separate duplexes.
but it depends on the septic too.
Yes,
Hmm.
so we'd have to look at that.
If the septic still only takes 18 bedrooms.
Mhm. Everything's on the uphill, and it's town water coming in.
Right. So you don't have to.
So
worry
that's a
about
good
that.
thing, yeah, you don't have to worry about proximity on that. And the houses are up on the high part,
Right,
so you're not pumping septic.
right.
Anyway,
So, I mean, you have to be mindful, obviously, even as an affordable housing trust, if you're putting yourself in the position of effectively a developer, that you're also assuming all those risks. So it sounds simple enough to say 40B, and as I said, it's worked in many communities, but, I'm looking at this site, you've got some immediate abutters to what's now going to be a roadway or a driveway servicing 18, 24, 30 bedrooms, whatever you end up with when you're done here. One of those files an appeal, they're entitled to proceed and attempt to avail themselves of their appellate rights. Under 40B, the odds of success for them are not great, under 5%. Doesn't mean they're not going to tie you up for 3 years. I've represented the town of Lancaster 2019 and the approval of an unfriendly, a traditional 40B. The town wasn't terribly pleased about it, but they came in and the town was under its 10% threshold and went through and made some revisions and ultimately issued a 30+ page decision on a project that was permitting before the board through the permitting process for 2 straight years. 200 units, 201 units, I think, when all was said and done. Still hasn't gotten constructed because the neighbors filed an appeal and they've been litigating it since early 2019. So we're on year 4 and we're nowhere close to being done. They're still in discovery.
wow.
Now, COVID's to blame for a little bit of that, but still, that's a risk. Yeah, you wouldn't have any issues with DHCD. You wouldn't have any issues presumably internally with your ZBA, for example, because your ZBA would be held to that same standard, but you do have to seek all proper state and federal permits. There's no exemptions from those, which would include an order of conditions under the state act.
Mhm.
And so if your conservation commission is not supportive of the project, even if you're not within the 50 feet, you're still within the 100-foot state jurisdictional bounds, they can deny you and you would need to seek a superseding order and you would likely be successful in getting that order from DEP, but that's more money and more time. So you just need to be mindful that all the same risks that I would be describing to a developer, I'm gonna be describing for you as an affordable housing trust if you're acting as if you're a development entity, even if you're not ultimately gonna, be pouring the foundations yourself. So,
I would recommend before you decide on any of the lots is to talk with the neighbors, talk with all the other boards, get support before you even try to go forward. That's what we did with the other one that we did. Shopped around all the boards saying, what do you think of this? Would you be in support of this?
Which one?
The Habitat House.
Oh, the half.
If you got
Just the house in neighborhood, right?
Yeah,
that's
right.
Yeah, this is,
I mean, with this, no one's gonna see it except for in the winter when the leaves,
Yeah,
they will see them going in the driveway. But, you wouldn't be able to see it from the road. It's all about the abutters, mostly, usually.
mhm. Okay.
Okay.
Keep going, sorry.
so I'm not gonna get bogged down too much in the guidebook because you can read the guidebook on your own, but I just wanted to point out a couple of other points. So in chapter 3, which starts on page 10, this talks about creating a vision for the trust. And so some of this we've already discussed just in the dialogue we've already had today. It says, bottom of the page, creating a vision is a good first step. For instance, you might picture your housing trust converting a market rate property to affordable units or accepting publicly owned land for the development of affordable housing. You may picture it facilitating pre-development work, like we just talked about, or providing funds to buy additional affordable units in a private development. Or you may picture setting up a rental program that can provide housing assistance to low or moderate income households. So the last of these is a good example, and it's primarily what we were going to be discussing today, which is your interaction with the housing authority. So, housing authorities sometimes offer those sorts of programs. When I had a discussion, I've had a couple of discussions. One was with Joan, one was, I think we had maybe a month ago at this point before the holidays. And that was, the differences between a housing authority and a housing trust. And sometimes there's a sort of a lack of appreciation for the differences between the entities or organizations. And part of that is because there is an overlap. There are tasks that you can perform as a trust that go hand in hand with tasks that sometimes housing authorities perform. But in my experience in the communities that I represent that have housing authorities, those housing authorities are managing properties that are owned by the housing authority. They're properties, they're tenanted, they're acting like a landlord or a management company. In some instances, they're conducting lotteries. I work, I wouldn't say a fair amount. I've worked on a couple of occasions with the Chelmsford Housing Authority. I don't know if you had any experiences when you were in Lowell with the Chelmsford Housing Authority, but they're fairly active in that area, Middlesex County. And the Chelmsford Housing Authority, David Hedison has done a lot of work there with surrounding communities, and they have functioned as lottery agents for 40B developments. And they'll also assist in getting other affordable housing projects off the ground. So that's where there's a little bit of an overlap. But the goal here as an affordable housing trust is to do things with the funds that you're able to gain as a trust that would facilitate either the preservation or the creation of new affordable housing in your community. And again, sometimes housing authorities are doing those things, but very often they're just tasked with a series of different developments that they're managing. In some ways, still preserving the affordability by virtue of their role as a management agency. But I don't know affordable housing trusts like yours to be acting as management agencies. Again, typically they're in and they're out. They're not, they don't establish long-term relationships with specific developments. There's some talk here in, I think it's in section, on page 24. So is this chapter 4 still? No, chapter 5. So chapter 5 talks about the local housing trust getting to work. And so the first recommendation is to create an action plan. And one of the things that they talk about, and you already alluded to it before, Veronica, is referring to existing plans that you have on record and becoming familiar with those plans and how you can fit into those plans. So sometimes that's a master plan, sometimes it's a comprehensive housing plan, sometimes it's a housing production plan. And so it's nice that in Townsend, you have a relatively recent housing production plan. I work in some communities that don't have housing production plans, or they have one that they had back in 2009 that expired in 2014, and they haven't touched it ever since. So yours is up to date. That's a good thing. I don't know, and this is probably a sore subject, I don't know the status of the master plan.
No, we have an accepted master plan now. Yeah. I
Okay.
have that here too. This is November 2021. It was accepted maybe about the same time, maybe a little bit after the housing production plan.
Okay.
I don't know. That's all I'm saying.
Even further, it's even later than that. I think because the master plan was accepted 2 months ago? 3
It
months
was
ago?
definitely last year.
It was last spring.
No, it was since I've been here.
It's been
Really?
since you've been.
Oh, yeah. The master plan? Oh, yeah.
It was turned in last spring. Maybe it was, July or August that it was accepted, but it's definitely been
Yeah.
accepted by the.
Yeah, it definitely is a real
Was Lance
thing.
still on the planning board when it was accepted? No,
Oh, no.
okay, so then it was since your time.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
Well, but that's good that you have up-to-date plans, because you're not having to, again, I work with some affordable housing trusts that don't have any
Don't
plans to
have any.
rely upon. So they're trying to, they're really starting at ground zero, and they're trying to determine what the needs of the community are. You can look to your master plan and your housing production plan and say, okay, these are the goals in the housing production plan. These are the objectives in the master plan. We can help with objectives 1, 3, and 7. And then sort of see where you fit into that. And again, a lot of this starts with you having funds available to you. So the more active affordable housing trusts I work with are those that have gathered significant funds over the years, and in multiple ways, through donations, through properties that have been conveyed, that have been acquired by the town, transferred to the Affordable Housing Trust, and then the Affordable Housing Trust sells them off, and that puts money in the coffers. I helped the town of Tingsboro create an affordable housing trust. At this point, probably about, I think we started on it in 2019, and then COVID put us a little bit behind. But I think they officially adopted it in 2020, and then they adopted their bylaw at the annual town meeting last year. So it's relatively new. It's a young affordable housing trust. They don't have much by way of monies, but they've got a lot of affordable housing. In fact, I started long before I was town council in Tingsboro. I started representing their ZBA as special counsel back in 2006, and was representing them on 40B projects. And they just got one after another, and all of 3A from the Chelmsford line all the way up to Nashua. It's like 40B central. It's just one after another, but they hit their 10% because they just kept approving them. And so they quickly got way over 10%, but they've just got a whole slew of them. And so they want to be sure that those stay affordable. They don't want any of those to drop off the inventory because they don't want to be exposed again, particularly while we still, 3 years into the decade, still await the final census number updates, which we don't have yet. So that's the chasing your tail with 40B. You've got this 10% standard. And what they do over the course of the decade is, when you have a new affordable housing project built, let's say it's 100 units and 25% or 25 of the units are affordable, they add all 100 units to your count. So 75 go on to the market rate side and 25 go on to the affordable side, but they're not adding baseline growth in the community. So all these one-off projects, whether they're single family homes or they're 100-unit buildings that aren't 40B, they're just 100% market rate. Those are not being added to the inventory. And that happens for 10 years until they update the inventory. And so you see your number climbing and you're like, oh, we're getting there, 8%, 9.2%, 10.1%, we're finally there. And then the new census numbers come in and they do the math again. And no, you're not at 10.1, you're at 6.1.
So just to reiterate what you said before, the housing authority manages properties that are owned by the housing authority and also preserves affordability. The housing trust does things with funds to create new housing, and we are not a management agency.
That's correct. Now, I don't know, every housing authority is a bit different. And so I haven't represented your housing authority. I've not provided your housing authority with much of any assistance since I've been town council in Townsend. So I don't know specifically what your housing authority does on a day-to-day, week-to-week, year-to-year basis.
They do not own any properties.
Correct.
So I'm not sure what their tasks have been since they've been in existence. I mean, I read their mission statement on their website there, but I don't know what they do on a month-to-month basis.
They did get our housing production plan created. I think that's probably the thing that they've mostly done in the past couple of years. I think
The biggest thing.
biggest thing, yeah.
Do the affordable projects in town use a different agent for for lotteries than the housing authority?
To my knowledge, the housing authority hasn't been a part of a lotteries. Chatwood Acres and Townsend Wood is our cat movements, they're the management,
Okay,
so they would have run the lotteries and stuff, yeah.
It used to be a long time ago that Atwood Acres was under the
was.
housing authority.
But there was some kind of agreement, I don't, way before my time, that they gave it to our cat.
Yeah, and
I-
I'm
it
not
was
sure how
something.
that happened. It just kind of happened. And
The housing authority put out the RFP for a company to build and manage the
Okay.
property, and that was our cap,
Okay, all right, so that's how that happened.
you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cause, you know, the housing authority, a lot of housing authorities, like in cities or whatever, they're like full-time, all the time.
Right.
Ours is volunteers. They
Right.
don't have time to be managing properties and
Right.
such.
Okay.
But they had been working on the outward leftover property, trying to get that developed,
Right,
but it didn't go anywhere that I know
right. I remember there was a vote at town meeting. It was for veterans housing. And it failed.
Yes, that was just a few years ago. I was here for
Yeah.
that.
I wasn't on the select board then. Not sure what board I was on. That was
Planning probably.
probably, so about 4 or 5 years. Okay.
So there are more examples you can read up. Again, I'm not going to read a 50-page document to you, but you can look at chapter 6, starts on page 30. There's a whole series of examples of what affordable housing trusts in other communities have done. So, you know, they give the example of a town of Eastham has a rental assistance program that they administer through funds that have been made available to the Affordable Housing Trust. The town of Stowe offers grants to developers to create affordable housing or a greater percentage of affordable housing than would otherwise be required. Stowe's example, their affordable housing trust was established in 2005, and although it doesn't sound, I don't know, we're not council in Stowe, it doesn't sound as if there's much funding available, because it refers on the second page to limited funding available, but they've effectively been funded, it says almost entirely by I think this is the one. Yes, funded entirely by inclusionary zoning fees to date. So that's one way that communities that have seen some surge in development have funded their trust. We do some private work from time to time in the town of Salisbury. We have our offices up in Newburyport, and Salisbury has an affordable housing trust, and they require, as many communities do, they require either the creation of affordable units in every development with 4 or more units, or they require a payment in lieu. And, you know, for smaller developments, there aren't a whole lot of 50-unit developments being permitted in the town of Salisbury, but there's a whole lot of 4 and 8-unit developments, you know, along the beach and elsewhere. And so when you're developing a 4-unit project and the inclusionary zoning bylaw says minimum 10% affordable, well, 10% is 4/10 of a unit. You can't offer a partial unit, so you got to offer a whole unit. Well, offering 1 of 4 units as affordable is a big hit to a developer. They tend to lose money on that affordable unit, and they got to use the others to make up the difference.
of.
So they'd much rather do the calculation and pay into the Affordable Housing Trust. And so my experience is that virtually nobody creates affordable units that they don't have to in Salisbury. Everybody pays into the trust. And that's provided the trust with a fairly steady income stream over the years.
We don't have an income stream. We have the 100K that the Board of Selectmen voted to be ARPA funds, which Melissa put in an account that is designated for us, and those funds have been transferred, and we have to get a listing of what we have. If there is interest, does that go back into the affordable housing? Do you know, Aaron? How that would work?
Interest on the ARPA money?
Uh-huh.
I'm not. I just don't know how interest on ARPA funds is working, whether it's goes into the specific project or whether it goes back to be reallocated by the Board of Selectmen. That's something we'd have to ask
Well,
I don't
I
know, some plus
I specifically wanted that account created so that we could move that 100K into that fund. So it will be, I assume, earning trust in that account. Yes. But
Yeah, I
I
think-
don't know.
I think we've dispersed that money to you, so it's no longer sitting in an ARPA line.
That's
It's been
exactly right.
dispersed to the trust, so it's probably yours too.
And if the money doesn't get, is there a deadline on spending the funding? I thought,
December 2027.
Correct.
So by them designating it to the trust, is that the town spending it? Or does then the trust have to spend
That's
it?
where I
right
They
went.
have to
The
report
trust,
back.
yeah, the
That's
trust
why-
has to report back $100,000 in spending.
right,
Yeah.
right. So my guess is if
Okay.
it spends the money, then there would be no issue. And I'm guessing as much as you
Yeah.
are, because I don't know. But my guess is that if it spends those funds and therefore doesn't have to return them to the government, then you're gonna be fine keeping the interest.
Yeah.
But if you have to return the money, because it's quite possible they say, well, the interest that you
Yeah.
earned is on money that wasn't yours to begin with, you're giving it back to us.
Which is why I want to do projects ASAP. Or at least get them, you
You
know,
can start the permitting process. So it costs money to make a 40B application, not only in terms of preparation by engineers and architects and whatnot, but application fees that need to be paid and legal fees that need to be paid. You can find a way to capture all those costs and use those monies to pay for it.
okay.
So long as the line item was broad enough that it just said for purposes of facilitating
Right, so-
affordable housing, right? So,
Very broad.
right. So
So we could do, I don't know. Do you remember how much, what the grant was that you guys got for this?
It was small. It was less than 30,000, I think.
That was 15 years ago, though,
Yeah.
engineering is different.
Oh,
It's gonna be
absolutely.
a
Yeah.
different world today.
I'm just, it would be nice to get two plans if we could. This one and another one rolling, you know, and get them engineered and do the permitting for 40Bs. I'm thinking, this is me and Karen and I talked about this, but I don't know what's but you know, do like tiny houses or workforce housing behind Atwood Acres and back in there on that property, get what we can in there. So,
That's in here too.
and there aren't a lot of abutters there. Really, which one is that with the cave? with
The next one after the one we were looking at before.
But I'm just thinking, we have to spend this money. We should do what we can over the next couple of years, get that money spent and have something that we can then put out for RFPs.
Yeah,
And those are the.
so there's a,
Likely in mind.
yeah, there's a easement that goes across here to access this piece. This was planned very poorly, obviously, because like this lot is crazy.
it's like horseshoe upon horseshoe.
I know.
Right.
And the thing with this parcel, the Atwood parcel, so there's a well that goes with this parcel that can only be used for the needy. So each time these were developed, we had to go to court to get a decree that said that it followed the well.
Is that the same for this parcel?
Yes,
Yeah.
Oh,
so-
boy.
yeah, yeah.
Well, there's some legal fees to come out of your 100,000.
Yeah,
We had met with Sheila Harrington way back when.
yeah,
This is 5 years ago, not long after I came on, and had discussions about how to do this, and I was brought up to speed on what had been done with the prior developments and the litigation that would be required.
mhm.
So there's a lot of land there.
Not really, I mean,
This one has
It's big over
constraints.
here.
yeah,
If you look at the size of these buildings, like you could fit another building the same size as that front one.
but where do you put the septic is the question. The septic for this one is right here, and the septic for this one, I think, is over here.
No,
And these don't have town water, correct?
Right,
Why is the red absolute constraint?
there's a perennial stream. That white line is the perennial stream.
Why does it go up here? Why is this all absolute constraint?
Cause there's a pond up here.
and every year, 1, 2.
No, the Squanicook River is down here.
And is absolute constraint the no build setbacks, or is it just the full 100-foot jurisdictional bounds from anything that's a wetland resource area?
The latter.
Okay, so it's not, so it's a little bit of an overstatement to say it's an absolute constraint. It's a permanent complication on that 50 to 100 foot distance, right?
Correct.
So, yeah. So that opens up, that makes this a little bit wider, this swath here.
Yes,
And get another 100, you get essentially half of this distance is gonna be opened up.
Pull that off, yeah.
So,
Yeah,
you could squeeze some stuff in.
if you could, yeah, you might be able to build something here and then build something here and have the septic in between
Yeah,
in the area that's not within the constraints.
I mean, I think you should look at the lot that has no constraints first.
That's the two, parcels, that's the West
That's the
Townsend piece.
Blood Road, yeah. Um, It's just a big rectangle.
oh, yeah.
Here's the question though, if we're gonna sell property to get money, I like this property, and I think that, it's like what, 6 or 7 acres total? 7 acres. And it would be nice to say, okay, how much can we fit? How much housing can we fit in there with water and septic?
Mhm.
How many bedrooms? Then determine how many units based on the number of bedrooms. We could make them some 1 bedroom, some 2 bedroom. And my thought is make them look the, what is it, front house, back house? Big house, little
Big
house, back
house.
house, barn.
Yeah,
Use that sort of construction so that they're kind of like, so
This-
you feel like you have some privacy and it isn't all.
it looks like it belongs in the neighborhood.
And it looks like it fits the
This is a dead
neighborhood.
end road up here.
So how many
I know.
bedrooms can we get in
Right.
there? With the septic and the,
Right.
and view it as one single parcel instead of. two.
Right, and then you put 2 or 3 of those big house, little house, back house barn. So it looks like there's 3 colonial houses with barns, but there's actually 4 units in each.
Right,
Right.
and didn't we look at this and say it was the 2 acre frontage?
Yes,
Or in
it's,
this,
yeah,
it's
it's
whatever
outside
zone
the
is.
aquifer.
Yeah, it's not in the aquifer, so. I mean, yeah, we could look at this before the funky one of Dudley.
And are you suggesting you'd be able to do something here by right as opposed to 40B?
Yeah, on this one, I think, by right.
Thinking about age restricted
Um,
or no?
if we did, this,
That would be a great place for age restricted.
It's
because
not-
so far away from.
it's for, this is better for age restricted, especially if we get the bridge over the pedestrian bridge, so that you could walk from here to the bike trail
Library.
and then go, this is South Row Road.
Oh, okay.
You could get to the bike path for,
Oh, if there was a bridge over the Squanicook.
over the Squanicook, the pedestrian
yeah.
bridge that we just gave a
Just
go-ahead for. It hasn't gone through permitting, but the selectmen just said, yeah, go for it. So, if that actually does get developed, this is walking distance to that
Right,
bridge.
yeah.
And then we could also work with I see this one is 55 over. This one not as much. We could work with the senior center to get the bus to come out to bring people
Mhm.
to the senior center, take them back at the end of the day. And we just got a second bus at the, at the senior center. So anyway,
Yeah, if you want to spend that 100, it's by the end of 2026,
2027.
7.
So we've only got 5 years. Spend it.
I would start with those two.
With this one and this. And then see if we can, cut off, the one up off Kings Road,
Mm.
cut off that back part and see if we, with some frontage,
That's.
so we can sell it at a higher rate to, DEP or Fish and Wildlife or whoever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So this,
talking about cutting it off.
What do you
What is
want?
that?
because this abuts Fish and Wildlife back here. And then you could, build something here. Potentially there, but
This is the one where if we were gonna do 40R overlay or whatever it's called, I would want this property included in it.
in the MBTA communities, or you want to do a 40R?
I don't know. maybe MBTA communities is what I'm thinking, and just 40R because that was what was being thrown out. But,
Because 40R you get money, the town gets money.
Yeah, you got,
The only
it'd be nice to get
difference-
the check.
Yeah,
money's always good.
but it's a
for towns.
long, hard process.
But it doesn't need to be, I mean, it can be a faster process than a 40B.
Yeah.
And typically is.
Yeah.
So I've done about a third of the 40Rs in the state, maybe less than that now, a quarter of them. So we've done them in a lot of communities. And, once you're done with your visioning exercises, you have a sense as to where you want it to be. The planning component can take some time. I'm working down in Fairhaven right now, and we've been working on the planning component since the spring. We're supposed to go to the annual town meeting, and I keep saying to the town, you're not gonna make it to the spring, so so it gets tough because the planning component. But once you know where you want the district to be, it's a 6-month process. I mean, really, you gotta get your application into DHCD. They have 90 days to review it, including a completeness review, and then they get your eligibility letter, and you go to town meeting and get the adoption. So the
It
challenge with
says that with
Yeah.
town meeting, get it done.
Right, right.
Um,
However, the governor's legislation last year reduced the quantum of vote to a simple majority
Right,
for 40R, so
right.
that makes it a little bit easier, right?
Lancaster just passed their 40
Oh,
that
did
we
they? Okay.
worked on, yeah.
Oh, great, yeah, so that's, I mean, that's one possibility. The only question I've got here is, would you qualify? So as you know, to qualify for a 40R overlay, you've got to
Yeah,
be
it's
either
not-
transit oriented, you've got to be area of existing commercial development or a highly suitable location, and
It's not.
Yeah.
it's not jumping off the page to me as being
No.
something that's gonna,
Okay.
right, so.
Yeah, I think along 119
Yeah, this is really the
is
only.
really the only place you're gonna be able to make a
do
case
that,
for a
yeah.
40R.
Okay.
And you gotta
Yeah,
get the
and even
neighbors.
only certain parts of 119, probably.
All right, so,
East Townsend as opposed to West Townsend.
Right.
but this parcel has,
You could get some sale money for that.
Selling as a fish and wildlife, yeah.
Fish and Wildlife has said they're interested, right?
well,
Maybe.
so,
At
yeah.
one time, they said.
Mm.
And I do know that unless you have frontage, they aren't gonna pay, anything.
There is frontage.
Yeah,
Frontage
so
over
would
here
we
and
sell
frontage
the
over there,
whole,
so.
whole parcel? Should we approach them about this?
Or sell like,
And sell it with
sell
the,
the north side.
sell it with the
of it.
frontage on Haynes and save the little bit of frontage on Wallace Hill.
Yeah, and what about that little piece there?
The little piece I think is, it would be, that looks like it's worth having someone do an evaluation of that upland.
Mhm.
Because it's 3 acres, so you could build something as of right there if you could
Right.
get it into that upland without getting too close to the stream there.
So maybe these two are both sellable. I don't know. The Haynes Road,
Well, both.
Both of
Okay,
them.
okay.
the bigger one to Fish and Wildlife. I can ask Ann Gagnon if she's interested. It probably wouldn't be until the fall, knowing how their
Their-
lands meetings are. But I can talk to her and say, so are you interested in this? And what would you, if we sold it, and that
Yeah.
would give us money
Yeah.
in our coffers.
Build there.
Built there, yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, then you'd be left with probably, it's probably 7 or 8 acres. You cut it off at the notch, almost save the Wallace Hill Road side. That way they would still have frontage on Haynes and save the Wallace Hill, and you'd have 8 acres with that little bit of frontage there.
Are you talking about cutting it off here?
Yeah,
We probably don't have enough frontage
You're
coming in off the street.
40B, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Oh, we did 40B.
You'd have to,
Okay,
yeah.
all right.
8 acres of all upland.
You should shop around town, see every lot that has not enough frontage, because I know there's several.
Or, yeah, everything.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so.
So I think we've looked at all.
That's all for them.
This is done. So back to Adams. So what is our intersection with the housing authority?
And so that's gonna depend, and you'll remember when we talked about today's meeting back in
Mhm.
December, we initially said, let's coordinate a meeting with me present between the housing authority and the housing trust. And then when we had further conversation, we said, well, let me first meet with the Affordable Housing Trust so we can talk generally about things that are going to be of no interest to the Housing Authority, which is, how does the trust work and what are your goals and objectives and what authority do you have and what funding sources are available? But I think that the next step is to coordinate that joint meeting. So you can ask the Housing Authority, you've been in existence for some time now. What have you been doing? We know you've been working on the master plan. No, I don't mean it quite like that. But what projects are underway? Where has your energy been focused? And are there things we can do to help? And here are some things you may be able to do to help us. Because there is going to be an intersection.
Yeah,
But I don't know what projects they've got, in the pipeline. I don't know what projects they've got underway. I don't know what tasks, and maybe projects is a big word. I don't mean large projects necessarily, but I don't know what tasks they're focused on right now with the housing production plan being complete.
Actually, there's a goals list in there at the last meeting. That's what they've been going over in that housing production plan.
and so this is the housing goals and strategies.
Yeah.
The 5-year goal.
And they're trying to prioritize.
And are they planning to develop?
Not that I'm aware of. They're just starting to go over the goals.
Okay,
Right.
because this is the thing that I was looking at and thinking, okay, so these are the goals that we should be thinking about, address changing local needs, including an aging population,
Yeah,
which is why this market rate and affordable 55 and over on this one.
well, it would definitely be beneficial to do a joint meeting to
Oh,
coordinate those
absolutely, I
goals.
think we need that, so, but anyway, so, okay.
And or I guess related, we're doing a properties meeting tonight. That's also, I want to say somewhere on that goals list to go over the town-owned properties and basically see what the steps, or I guess a streamline a process to take what's in tax title, potentially going into tax title, getting it to the town, and then doing what with those properties.
That's been done so many times.
I know it never goes
Each new
anywhere.
committee does that and come up with a list.
Each
and then it's
group
like,
reflects.
Oh, there's tax title issues,
Yeah,
never mind.
Nothing ever happened.
Correct.
but when you get those
And-
properties that have some tax title problem, it sometimes feels a little overwhelming.
But you could use your money to solve those problems.
Throw money at it, makes the problems go away.
But they're meeting with the treasurer collector tonight. I want to say there's 3 properties right now, don't ask me what they are, that are right at the cusp of being town-owned. So they're trying to do some kind of a process, whereas they're not just going straight to the newspaper. And like Town Properties has a chance and other.
Oh, yeah, we
committees
should definitely have a
chance.
needs assessment, like
Right.
see if it would be appropriate for, and I think the housing authority and the housing trust. Would be, at least have a comments on needs assessments if we get properties like that,
Right.
because. Even if all it is just to turn it over and flip it for cash, that goes into the housing authority, the housing trust's
Yeah,
coffers.
Right.
Even if they're too small for development, does the neighbor want to buy it?
Right, and I think that's what not the housing authority, Town Properties is starting to go through that list that I think you created and see if there's anything worth selling and that's how you guys got pieces now from Town Properties.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Of the trust? Which is, I know that the trust was formed and I know that at Springtown meeting, these 4 properties were turned over to the trust.
6 properties.
Oh,
It,
6.
it looks like 4 because some of them are close together.
Sure, oh, yeah, right. Did the trust ever do kind of some of the things that Adam talked about before we look at these specific properties? Do we look at kind of what our role should be in general?
That's kind of what we're doing
Okay.
right here, right now. Because, the original trust was seated October a year ago, or 2 years ago. It was seated in the fall, Friday was still here. So that would have been 2 years ago. And nobody that was seated on that committee is still on that committee.
Right.
And now there's the 3 of us. And everybody that was originally is gone. And
So yeah, MRPC had a contract to work on an action plan. And it just hasn't materialized yet because people,
Well, we are hoping we're
Oh,
getting.
yes,
Yeah, it does.
I'm working on it.
Good. And Karen and I have met,
We've
we've
met,
gone over the properties with ideas that we've talked about, but, anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Some of which we talked about right here, right now.
my recollection is that a couple of these properties, although they were not owned by the trust, because the trust wasn't in existence when they were acquired, had been specifically acquired for affordable housing purposes. I think two of the
This
six,
one?
right? Yeah.
I believe this one was, and the Dudley Road.
Yes,
Those
and
are
yeah,
the-
that we had gotten priority development fund. I don't even know if they still do that.
They don't, but
That's what we had a grant to explore those properties.
oh, okay.
And they were given for affordable housing
Yeah,
designated.
so does this have to be all affordable, or I'm afraid it's not developable if it's
No,
all affordable.
it doesn't.
No, it's
Yeah.
hardly
Yeah.
ever is.
Yeah, that's,
Okay.
as Adam mentioned, those projects are really, really hard and they're like,
Yeah,
yeah.
It's,
rarely- rarely
you
see
have,
it.
you have to have long-term objectives, because like I said, even if you made application today into the low-income housing tax credit program, you're looking at 2, 3, 4 rounds before you get selected, even if you qualify, because there are people just as qualified as you are that got in line well before you did. And
right.
that's after you're fully permitted and appeal periods have passed. And so it's just a long process, but it's a great outcome because you get 100% affordable housing, but
What has your experience been with the HUD 202? Did they bring that back or?
I don't think so. It's a good question.
Cause I saw something, I thought they had brought it back,
Did they?
but that's how we got the Atwood property. Those two properties built was the HUD grant. We tried, on the 5th year, we got it. We tried 5
Wow.
times.
Wow.
And you think it's back?
I thought I read something, one of those emails that you get with a million things in.
Yeah.
it.
Huh.
I'll have to check,
Yeah, I'll take a look too.
but they didn't replace it with anything, I guess is what I'm asking. I didn't,
No, not that I'm aware of. I mean, there are. What was the grant program? We did a project. I'll have to look. There are other grant programs that are out there, but it's still very difficult. So we have been working with a developer in Tingsboro to develop the old Tingsboro Country Club.
it's so sad.
I know, very sad.
It's very sad.
Play golf there every week.
Yeah.
Well, the family announced that they were not going to be able to manage it any longer. So they came to the town and said, we have a developer in the wings, Pulte Homes. And Toll Brothers. And we are prepared to sell it to the town if you want to buy it instead of a Sunny, but we're not going to sell it for a song. We
Right.
got Toll Brothers. So the price was like 4.8, I think,
Yeah.
for the entire site all on the river. So they went to town meeting twice. And they got all the way up to like, oh, what was the last? We got town meeting all the way up to like 3.1 or 3.2. They were going to pay for it. And it just wasn't close enough. We couldn't get there. So it actually didn't turn out too badly. The deal we ultimately negotiated with Toll Brothers is they agreed to give the town over 50% of the land at no cost
Wow.
Wow.
in exchange for cooperation by the town to facilitate the development of the rest through a friendly, it actually wasn't even a friendly 40B. It was going to be a friendly 40B, but then because the golf, you'll appreciate this, because the golf course use was a pre-existing non-conforming use of the property, because they have a provision in their zoning that says you can change from one pre-existing non-conforming use to a different pre-existing
With just a
non-conforming
special
use,
permit.
with just the special
Oh
permit.
my
They
goodness.
went to ZBA and said, we want to replace the golf course with just
200
just
units of
150,
housing.
and 116. And it took a while. They had to go to planning for the special permit for the site plan. They had to go to the ZBA for the special permit for the change of nonconformity. But they went to all the boards and took about a year. But they got all the permits they needed to get it done.
One of the selectmen in Tingsboro worked for me when I was involved. So I got firsthand blow by blow of every bit of the negotiation, including parts of the negotiation I don't think are public.
So did the town get the part by the river or the Cause I see they already started. building
Oh, I
on
don't
that.
know where they split it up.
Yeah, so they got a lot of most of the park by the river.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's
Jeez.
great.
Yeah, a lot of the areas that they wanted to, because it was gonna be, so much of that area is gonna be protected anyway.
Right.
So, and they were putting in a traditional like golf course style development. The focus wasn't on, riverfront. The focus was on, typical Toll Brothers, like,
Yeah.
some like it, some don't, little cookie cutter, but I will say they made a lot of adjustments to make it a little bit less cookie cutter. But you can choose one of 7 models or
Oh,
whatever
that's
and
good.
change the colors among
Yeah.
the, their palette of like 10 or 15. They make it, I'll give Toll Brothers credit. They make a good presentation. They came in and they did the whole dog and pony show for the boards and, the boards really twisted their arms, solar ready. Developers like, no, we don't do solar. And what you do now? They came around and said, okay, we'll give you solar. And so, they agreed to maintain the clubhouse and
Wow.
as like an area for the town to use for functions or whatnot. And so the town said, no, we don't want you to just maintain it, like not tear it down. We want you to fully renovate it and put solar on the roof.
Oh.
Okay.
we agreed. Wow.
Oh, that's good.
That clubhouse needed.
Oh, yeah.
There's some
Yeah, a long
A
time.
long time.
there's some value in 100 units, 100 of new construction
Oh,
in
yeah, they-
Kingsborough by the river
Oh,
on a golf course, or a former golf course. So,
And all those people who live in those Toll Brother houses are just gonna join Vesper.
yeah, right.
Oh, yeah, just like that.
But anyway, my point in telling you the story about Tingsboro was not to talk about Toll Brothers. They have this additional parcel that was immediately adjacent. And the town wanted to build affordable housing on it. And in the early dealings with the developer, it was going to be gifted to the town's new affordable housing trust. The Affordable Housing Trust said, well, what are we going to do with this? So then we get it. Now we gotta try to develop it. And we're not really developers. So we got to find a developer and can you do it? And Toll Brothers said, well, we don't do affordable housing, so no, we're not. They wanted at least 25% of the units in this. It could fit 16 units on this separate parcel. We want 4 affordable units. No, we're not doing that. So they twisted Toll Brothers' arms, and Toll Brothers found a local developer that they kind of partnered with to bring in to do this development. And so we were able to facilitate that. So as part of the approvals, it's contingent upon, because there are provisions in the zoning that require some. They have an inclusionary housing bylaw, zoning bylaw that requires either the creation of affordable housing or a payment in lieu or a gift to the town that's somehow connected to the goal of creating affordable housing. So they're going to have this developer come in, local developer going to come in and build 16 units. And 4 of them will be affordable in perpetuity. So
Wow. I hope Toll Brothers makes back their money.
So this is just a question, if that were to happen. All right, so there are 4, so assume this happened in Townsend, and so the trust negotiated these 16 units, 4 of which were affordable. And so, okay, off it goes to be developed. When the development is done, it would be the housing authority that would make sure that the units remained affordable and monitored that. Is that correct?
It could be. So I will tell you, most, and I think it's safe to say this, it has to be, most communities in Massachusetts don't have housing. There are relatively few of the 351 cities and towns that have local housing authority. I think in my towns, most of my towns don't have housing authorities.
Why do we have housing?
Many communities do. I'm just saying that there are many that don't. So it's not a guarantee just because you're developing an affordable unit that, like, Tingsboro has no housing authority. So there's no housing authority to maintain,
So then who keeps their eye on it?
either a third party monitoring agent, which is typically how it works with a traditional 40B development. When it goes to the ZBA and the ZBA issues a comprehensive permit, they require that there be a monitoring agent appointed and paid for by the developer to monitor the affordability.
Okay,
For the LIP project, it's the town that often takes on that responsibility. And if you have a housing authority, the housing authority could certainly perform that function. So that's a good conversation to have with your housing authority about whether your housing authority has the capabilities to perform that oversight function.
okay, so as far as your part of this meeting goes, then our next thing to do is to coordinate a meeting between among you, us, and the housing authority to discuss how we're gonna do this.
I think that makes some sense. You can, I mean, when you're ready for that conversation to be productive, the Affordable Housing Trust has to be prepared to talk about what its goals and objectives are and priorities are. And we've done a lot of that over the course of the past hour. The Housing Authority needs to be prepared to talk about what its current tasks are, what its objectives are. And then you have to sort of see where the two intersect and say, well, listen, we're considering developing this property. Here's how we'd like to do it. If we're able to get the necessary approvals, what support can you provide that's within your purview? Whether that's, oh, we can act as a lottery agent for the purposes of the affordable units, whether that's we can act as the monitoring agent for purposes of monitoring long-term affordability, or whether they have other services that they can provide. That's a question for the housing authority.
Okay. So I think for our purposes, what we need is the 5-year action plan. So do we have a timeline for that? This is 2.2 on the, on the agenda, I think is where we're rolling to. Meet with MRPC to review the DLTA document and discuss next steps in developing a 5-year action. Where are we at with that? Because I think that's the thing that we can focus on over the next month or so.
It's in my head.
Good.
It just needs to be.
Okay, all right. So,
Can I say mid-February?
meanwhile,
And I say that because we have a gazillion
other things, and the
state
DLTA are coming
agencies that
in
want to
and-
throw money at the communities and where they'll go between, and so
Feel free to,
it's
feel free to
mayhem.
continue throwing down the pipe.
Yeah, oh, yeah. Oh, I'm not complaining about the money, believe me, no. I'm
So-
just,
Okay, so mid-February. Cindy, you were gonna say something.
No, I'm good. I'm good.
Okay, you're good.
Yeah.
So
that's my deadline. I
we
hope to
could-
get it to you before that, but that's my,
So we could meet before that.
Yep.
The three of
Sure.
us. And talk about these properties
Okay.
and what we see happening and what our goals are.
if
And-
you could also,
Send us-
excuse me, if you could also, read in this and think about what you want the trust to be and do,
Okay,
because I can't just make that up. I
right,
mean, you guys need to discuss what role do we want to play. You could go, on Groton's website, they have actually a housing committee, they have a housing authority, and they have a housing trust, and each one has a role. And you can go on their website and read what each of their roles are, so
okay,
that they don't step on each other's toes and duplicate efforts.
And I think specifically referencing at least those two plans that the town has, the master plan and the housing
Absolutely.
protection plan is because they're already put together, they've already been publicly
Yeah.
vetted, and they've got goals and objectives in them.
Right.
And
okay.
just say like,
This is our piece.
it's easy to say, we're looking at, like you said, 1, 3, and 7 of the housing production plan, we think fit within the housing trust roles, and the master plan, chapter 11, that sounds like us, you know what I mean? Like that's, and then that way, when you come to talk to the housing authority, you're gonna be speaking directly from the plan, including the plan that they helped prepare.
Okay, so
Just give some more kind of focus. It's like, this is our role.
our next meeting is to nail this down. And to get it to Karen. who's
But I
going
can come to your meeting and, we can have a full
Oh, that would be
discussion
good.
about
Okay.
things.
Yeah, all right, so we'll talk about next meeting in a few minutes. And the role and what we want, our role, what role we want to play and what we want to do with the property. And then we'll get the plan, the 5-year action plan, so we're probably looking at March. For meeting with early March or so, meeting with
Joint meeting.
a joint meeting, yeah.
And the same
And
thing,
with
if
that,
they're looking at their goals, they can look at the goals and objectives in the plan and say, oh, we think that's better for us. This requires money, so maybe the trust is better for this thing.
Okay,
I know they don't like to give up authority.
What's the name?
Okay, so, all right, so our next meeting, meet with Karen, we do the 5-year action plan. And then, in March, early March, I think, we meet with you guys and nail down our role.
One thing the trust ought to give some thought to, and it's not anything that can't be done in conjunction with that or separately or even after that, is how to try and make the trust self-sustaining, right? So you've got the trust and you've got some properties that have been transferred to you. But you have all sorts of ideas of things you want to do. This would be a short conversation if you didn't have ARPA funds, because you wouldn't have any money to do any of it.
And that's where we were until,
Right, so
Okay.
now you have the ARPA funds, and that's great, but those funds have a shelf life, and those funds are also gonna get used if you start doing all these things you're talking about, so then what?
right,
So I think that there's a lot of answers to that question, not a lot, there are a few answers to that question. One is the idea of properties that you may not need, selling those properties off and selling them for a price, and then placing that money in the coffers, and then you can use it for other projects. Facilitating development. So going back to the Ashland example of that project that was in litigation for years, at the end of the day, they sold off that property. They got the affordable housing that they meant to create, but they also got the purchase price for the land. It was over $1 million for the entirety of the site. So those monies can then be used and put toward the next project. Because they're not recouping the money, for example, on those rehab of units. When they buy an affordable unit and they buy the affordable unit for $180,000 and they put 20K into it and then they sell it again, sometimes DHCD will allow them to bump that 180 up a little bit. So when they resell it, they're reselling it for 185, but they're not often making up the 20K they just spent. It's sort of money that they're spending in the interest of keeping it affordable. But that's a loss to them. You do that once, it's fine. You do that 10 times, you've just lost $150,000. So you need some form of funding the trust. Another way is what I talked about in, what was it, Stowe, where they have an inclusionary housing bylaw, inclusionary zoning bylaw, where you require payments in lieu, either the creation of affordable units or payments in lieu. Now, there's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. I happen to think that many communities, by providing a mandate of affordable units for any project over 4 units. I happen to think that that's subject to challenge on constitutional grounds, but you can provide for things like density bonuses. So if you've got a site that you could typically only build 2 units on, say you're allowed to double the density in exchange for providing one of the units as affordable or providing a payment into the affordable housing fund. And double the density sounds fine when it's 2 to 4, maybe not when it's 50 to 100, but you can provide some formula that would provide for some bump up in the overall density in exchange for either creating affordable housing or making a payment per unit into the affordable housing trust fund. And then that again, that's a funding source. And even if it's a $15,000 check here, a $30,000 check there, 3, 4, 5 developments a year, 3, 4, 5 years, and suddenly you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars that you have available to you. So that's a consideration as well.
well, that takes us to 2.3 then. on the agenda.
Like I
Meet
said,
with the town administrator to discuss possibilities for funding affordable housing with the community preservation.
Yeah, so I think the reason that I was asked to come is because when Lowell a few years ago decided that they wanted to do the Community Preservation Act, I was the person that the city manager put in charge of it. And so there are a couple of ways that you can get the Community Preservation Act on the ballot. The first is through a ballot initiative. So that's through, a certain number of signatures. And it occasionally happens that way that the
How many signatures? do you
EPA,
need?
let's see.
Is that the 125 or so, or ballot initiative? I think of a ballot
Petitions
initiative.
signed by at least 5% of the community's registered voters.
Sure.
So,
And it doesn't matter what precinct, that's 5%.
yeah, 5% of the registered voters. So, I mean, we have a high percentage of registered voters in town.
$6,000.
Yeah, so say if it was 6,000, 10% is 600, 5% is 300. So,
Or you could sponsor it, right?
well, the other potential is that it's by the legislative body, the town, the
Town
board of selectmen would put it on a warrant for town meeting, and town meeting would put it on the ballot.
We've tried twice, right?
Yeah.
So those are the two ways that can happen. I mean, the
2000 and just over, around 2000 through 2003 when it first came into being.
Yep,
And then again, maybe 2 or 3 years
Yeah.
later, maybe 2006 or
down
something,
in
failed
flames.
both times, yeah.
Yeah, so, for those who aren't specifically familiar with CPA, it adds a surcharge onto the tax bills that goes into a specific community preservation fund held by the town. And then every year, the state's community preservation trust writes a check to the town as a percentage of what they've collected into their own fund. So using just round numbers, if you collected $100,000 in the fund in a year, the first 2 years that after Lowell adopted it, it was like 37% and 40%. And so you get a check from the state for $40,000 that goes into your community preservation trust fund. And those percentages from the state have varied wildly because it depends on how many people participate and how much money is in the state's community preservation trust. But the legislature has been making significant deposits into the community preservation trust over the last few years to raise that percentage. The community preservation trust at the state level is funded in part as well by registry of deeds transactions. So every time anybody in the state goes and files a deed or files some document with the registry of deeds, there's a percentage, there is a charge that they add onto your fee, whether you're a CPA community or not, that goes into the trust. So towns and residents have been paying into the community preservation trust for 20 years.
But we have received
And it has been $0 from those payments to the community preservation trust. One of the things that that was the most effective tool that we used in Lowell was, and I can find this from the registry of deeds, I haven't done it yet, to find that number. How much money have towns and residents deposited into the community preservation trust over the last 20 years? Because telling someone that, there's $1 million that you guys deposited that's gone now, other towns got the benefit of it, is sometimes a good selling point, trying to convince people that CPA would. So the main benefit of the CPA is that extra money from the state. So for every dollar you put aside, the state's going to give you a bonus on top of that for you to spend on projects that, quite frankly, need to happen in town anyway. When you get the money from the Community Preservation Trust, there's a committee that the town has to set up, Community Preservation Committee. That's set up by ordinance or by bylaw. You decide who's on it. There are 5 statutory appointed positions. So there has to be someone from the Conservation Commission. There has to be someone from the Planning Board. There has to be someone from the Historic Board. There has to be someone from the Housing Authority. There has to be someone from I don't remember the people. There's a fifth. There's a fifth board. Anyway, there's 5 statutory requirements to be on your committee, and then you can add on extra people appointed by the Board of Selectmen, selected from the town at large. And then that committee is tasked with creating a community preservation plan where they do public outreach to figure out what sort of community preservation is appropriate for the town. The money in that trust is divided into specific buckets. Every year you have to spend 10% of your allocated funds on historic preservation. You have to spend 10% of your allocated funds on open space and recreation. and you have to spend 10% of your allocated funds on affordable housing. You're allowed to spend up to 5% of your funds on administration. So that means a staff person, or a stipend for, and it's town the size of Townsend, that 5% is probably going to be additional hours for an existing staff person, but it allows you to have more staff. And the remaining funds you can spend in any of those three buckets.
So. Should I let you finish?
Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
gonna take another minute, and then so once you know, so if you got $100,000, that's just a guess. I have no idea how much tax you get, but if you brought in $100,000, you would have you could spend up to $5,000 a year on administration. You have to spend at least $10,000 on affordable housing every year. You have to spend at least $10,000 on and at least $10,000 on open space and recreation. And that remaining 65%, you're allowed to spend on any separate bucket. Now, the amount that goes into your trust fund, it depends on the percentage that you put in your when you adopt the Community Preservation Act. And you can adopt it at three levels, at 1%, 2%, or 3%. So that's the surcharge. You can add it at 1%, you can add it at 2%, you can add it at 3%, and that's just on the ballot. Obviously, if it's at 3%, you bring in more funds than if it's at 1%. And there are also some exceptions that you can put in. So you can put in an exception for commercial property. So the commercial property wouldn't be paying into the Community Preservation Trust Fund. That's not a real popular exception. You could put it, and I think I believe there's also an elder exception. So for elderly, there's an exception.
What about for
And-
income? Like an exception for income, like if your income is, because you can be elderly and still have enough income. to
Yeah.
Pay that 1%.
Yes, I also believe there's an exception for based on annual income.
I'm wondering. As far as what you could use the money for, you said open space and recreation.
Yeah.
The one thing in town that is going to need money put into it is the colored playground, what my kids call the colored playground over by Spalding, because that equipment needs to be replaced. And we do not have a fund to maintain that. So someone in town has taken it upon themselves to collect funds to have garbage removal there and things like that. Would Community Preservation Act funds be used for that playground?
So the Community Preservation Act funds for open space and recreation, I believe, I can look this up, but I believe they're supposed to be used for creation of new open space or new recreational space. And they're definitely not to be
Not
used
for
for
maintenance.
regular maintenance. But Community Preservation Act funds are typically not used for regular maintenance. They're typically used to that's for across all of the different buckets. It's used to preserve historic properties, to bring them, to do historic preservation work on them, but not routine maintenance on
We just have to declare that a historic property.
There are grants for that,
them.
Pardon me?
There are grants.
There are grants for the park grant is one of
Yeah.
the major grants for that. We're not eligible because we don't have an open space plan.
But we will see.
But we will soon. And then we can apply for a park grant to redo a
That's
playground.
also why although they didn't say it, it used to be that for mass trails, you had to have a current open space plan, but I didn't hear that in what I went to in December. Yeah.
So there's a big chart, actually, the Community Preservation Coalition, which is a nonprofit that's actually not a government agency, but they work with, I think it's 194 towns now in Massachusetts that have adopted the CPA. The Community Preservation Coalition has a great amount of resources about going through the process, but about what you can use the money for.
Okay.
And they have expanded since the original statute was passed again back in the early 2000s. They have made some changes to allow for more expanded uses. But typically that, I mean, it's those three buckets. For purposes of affordable housing trust, what lots of towns that have Community Preservation Act funds do is rather than try and, well, let me take a step back. The Community Preservation Committee vets projects. So either the town brings projects or private entities, nonprofits bring projects to the Community Preservation Committee to try to get funded. And so the CPC then vets those projects and tries to figure out which ones make the most sense, give the town the most bang for the buck. And then it has a bucket of money that they can pass out until that money's gone. What lots of towns do, however, for the affordable housing piece, is they automatically designate that 10% every year to the trust. And they can designate more, but they automatically designate that 10%, and then they don't have to worry about funding affordable housing projects. They let the trust, they refer those projects to the trust, and they fund that 10% every year into the trust coffers, rather than coming up with a specific project. They just use the funds for it, and that's allowed under the CPA. Different. So when we did it in Lowell, we did an evaluation process and did a big outreach to the city to try to determine what the goals were for the city, and they kind of broke down to most folks thinking you should spend about equal amount of money on each of those buckets. So rather than the 10%, it would be more like, like 30 to 35% of your funds to be spent on affordable housing. And so if that's something that the CPC was comfortable with, they could designate more than just the 10% every year to go to the affordable housing. But that would be a conversation between the trust and the Community Preservation Committee when it was established. I mean, I think that's, Lowell doesn't have an affordable housing trust. So there wasn't an entity to give the money to. So we actually vetted specific projects. But I think for purposes of towns and then creating, like Adam was saying, some sort of long-term funding source, the adoption of the CPA, the specific designation of those funds to the trust would at least create, you might not be able to do projects every year, but maybe every couple of years, if you're talking about, getting 30% of the trust's funds every year, every couple of years, you could say, do an engineering and planning for parcel to try to put it out for development. And that would, I think, given the kind of timelines that these projects take, I think if you've heard from Adam, hopefully they wouldn't take a decade, but
But
having,
even if you start one.
yeah, having like 2 or 3 in the pipeline
Right.
is a lot going on, and that would be the kind of thing where every couple of years, maybe let's do another one. And hopefully you've got one that's getting constructed and you're starting up another one at the time. And so it wouldn't be the trust having funds to be able to spend money hand over fist every year, but you have money every year to try and kind of save up to do a larger project. Especially if if you use that funding method in conjunction with some of the others that Adam was talking about, like having an inclusionary zoning ordinance or taking in some of the properties like that we talked about to sell and use the proceeds to fund, like the one we were talking about, selling the Fish and Wildlife.
Right.
So doing those things in conjunction would give kind of a steady stream from the CPA, plus then the money that comes in from property sales. And those two things hand in hand would probably be enough to fund a housing trust in a town like Townsend.
So I think we're going to be putting on the agenda discussion of the Community Preservation Act on the warrant for.
Yeah, and I think it's worth a conversation because at this
Yeah.
point in time, you just,
I think that figure you mentioned, how much we've already,
oh yeah, that was
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
that's a big deal. When people, how much money they've spent on other towns projects.
I know, that's huge. I think that's huge.
What percentage did you propose when it failed in 2000?
Early on, 1%.
And I,
There goes that.
Yeah, because we can reduce it. Oh, wait a minute.
because we also had the $100,000 exemption too, the first $100,000 value of the property exempt.
Oh,
I don't know if you can still
okay.
do that.
There's a list of exemptions. I didn't print them out.
I think you can, because I reviewed, one of my towns did it a couple of years ago and we had that on there. So unless they've changed it in the last couple of years.
I don't think we have. I think
Yes,
that's,
the first 100,000.
Oh, the problem was people heard tax surcharge and they were like, nope,
Yeah.
but they didn't understand that it's that percent of your bill,
right,
not the value of your house. So if your bill's $5,000, it's 1, 2, or 3% of that.
At that, right,
Yeah.
right.
How do you get that information out? That's the whole thing, so people understand that.
yeah, I mean,
That's, because those, like, that's a huge thing, and
Yeah.
all the other cities and towns are getting this money.
The
you know,
best
so-
way for us right now to get that out is to write something up and put it on the
Yeah.
website. I think people are starting to kind of look at the website. Think,
yeah.
Harrison probably has the analytics.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, we did outreach. I was on the radio, I was on TV, public access
We can do
television,
that.
on TV, just, answering questions from the host about all this information. And if you have, in my mind, if I tell you, if you invest this 1% and I can get you a 30 to 40% return on it every year, that's a pretty good investment. You're not going to get that anywhere else. But if I'm getting, even if it's 20%, even if the state is just matching 20% of the money we put in there, that's a huge dividend for extra things that we can do in town. For town projects that we might have to be spending town money on anyway. You're talking about, open space, dealing with open space, that's likely to be town property. The historic preservation, as we've talked about, we've got our own properties that we need to have historic preservation done on, where if we have to spend money on those, it'd be great if we got the state to kick in an extra 20% to help us. And affordable housing is almost, in a town like Townsend, where we're never going to have enough in that bucket to fund a full affordable housing project. It's likely to, I think you would have a very good argument and that would all go to the trust. And so, 20% extra of money going to the trust is a big deal. And just to every year we wait before we adopt it is a year that we're
Yeah,
just
and
letting that money go to other.
20 years of not getting that money at this point.
Yeah.
Did you go the route of a ballot initiative in Lowell?
No, believe it or not, one of the counselors brought it up.
Okay. Well, I asked the question because, I'm all for, grassroots efforts and trying to get the message out there.
Yeah.
We all know that such a small percentage of the town shows up at annual town meetings, let alone special town meetings. So there's a lot to be said also for, sure, put it on the website, but just having a comprehensive presentation prepared for town meeting that you're not winging, where you have all the figures and you can put the numbers out there and persuade those who are going to be voting on it momentarily, and also being mindful of what warrant you're putting it on. Some of my towns are mindful. So, and I don't want to speak out of turn here, but I think I've been doing this long enough in a number of different communities that, we know the average age of the town meeting goer. We know the reluctance sometimes for older individuals, in fairness, they're on fixed incomes often, to consider funding different future projects, whereas sometimes younger individuals are more willing to do that, particularly when they're in their prime earning years, right? So sometimes if you can get the younger folks out to something, they're going to be a little bit more open-minded about this concept of adoption of the CPA. So, can you put it on a town meeting warrant when you've got a school question on the warrant as well? So you're already pulling out the families and you're getting, right? So I mean, there's something to be said for just being mindful about how you're getting it out there.
It may not, okay. I'm just thinking we're gonna perhaps have a Prop 2.5 override
No,
question for
It's
the
not,
schools
it's not
anyway.
perhaps, definite. I got
And-
numbers from the schools. It's definite.
Well, yeah, so we're gonna have that anyway, and so if we put it on the ballot, is it less likely to pass if someone's gonna say, I'm not gonna vote for anything that, raises my taxes? Would it be better to just do it at town meeting?
And I don't think there's any prohibition that you, in terms of a waiting period after it fails, bring it back up
Not
again.
that I
So,
heard.
so you can bring, I mean, you can attempt to go the town meeting route, particularly if you're gonna have a school question, a Prop 2.5 override for the schools on the warrant.
On the warrant?
And then if it fails, consider putting it to next year on going the route of a ballot initiative and see if you can get it done that way.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's
Something to
a,
think about.
I would suggest we do something like we're doing for the water treatment plant tomorrow night, which is we have a meeting in the Great Hall that we can tape, where people can come and have questions about the Community Preservation Act and, invite all the members of all the boards and committees to come so that they're all here and can ask those questions. You tape that, you put it on the website, you have the YouTube link, so if people have questions about it. We can bring in the people from the Community Preservation Coalition. They are zealous advocates for it. And they travel all over the state, telling people why it's a good idea in every town and community. Because people in Lowell would say, that's for towns like Townsend.
What?
We're too big. We don't do open space. Like, they rejected it until a couple of years ago because they believed it was for rural towns.
Used to be, it was only open space and I think historic,
Yes.
and then they added the
The affordable housing piece was added.
And I think when the affordable housing piece got added, a lot more towns got interested in
I
it.
agree. Yeah.
Because we really don't have a way to have affordable housing, unless we fund it somehow.
I think it's certainly worth starting the conversation, and having people think about, especially, like you said, how much money has slipped through our hands
Right.
by not adopting it. People always seem to respond well to those numbers. So if it's $500,000 or $1 million that we've just lost because the towns have gotten it, I always find that to be a compelling argument. Every year that goes by, you're still paying it. Every time you walk down to the registry of deeds, if there nobody here walks. In Lowell, we can say walk if you walk down, but here you have to drive.
All right, so anything else for the work session?
Not for me.
Okay. So then, next meeting, so I put 2 suggestions down there for our next meeting, the Affordable Housing Trust, either January the 30th or Monday the 5th. And I like the 1 p.m. Monday's meeting time.
I do too.
Yeah, because
I'm good with that. And I can do either of those days.
Either, and Karen, you could come too, so
Yeah.
which day
Oh,
works
yeah.
better for you? I know there's like a February 7 deadline for DLTA. I don't know if that affects you.
Are you putting in for something?
We are.
Well, can I ask what?
We don't know yet.
Oh.
We talked about it in the Board of Selectmen meeting.
We have some ideas.
We have some ideas. One was Board of Health looking at the trash situation in town.
Well, and how to
We
negotiate
suggested.
appropriate trash.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, we won't do that one.
okay.
And the other one was the planning board,
It
the
was the
one,
planning board and it had to
was the
do
housing choice community, or was,
something like that. That was, Housing Choice was put out there.
that was one that was put out there. There was another one.
What are you
It
doing
had
for
to do
MBTA communities?
I thought we were already,
You have your action plan in, but you don't stop there.
Yeah.
oh, wow.
Yeah, but they got a year and a half, so everybody's gonna wait until the 17th month.
Maybe we should look at that. Yeah, so unknown,
Okay,
but you know,
But
ideas
either-
coming in on the 17th
E-
at our BOS meeting.
Okay.
Either of those dates are fine with me. The 30th is better than the 6th, but
For me too.
I'm available for both.
Yeah.
30th? Okay.
Either one works.
Let's do 30th and is 1 PM okay for everybody?
Yeah.
Okay. And that's on me. All right, and then we'll define our role and what we want to do with each of these properties.
I'll have some draft, I'll have a draft for you then.
Okay, and I'll check with Ann Gagnon about the
Fish and
property,
Wildlife.
Fish and Wildlife, up on the hill there. And see what the thoughts are with that. All right. With that, is there a motion that we adjourn?
I make a
Unless there's
motion. Does
anything
anyone
else.
else have anything else?
Okay,
I make a motion, we adjourn the meeting. Whatever time that is.
2:52.
2:52.
All right, is there a second?
I second that.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. We are all set, you guys. Thank you very much.